Andrew Morton unpacks the Cain and Abel story of William and Harry, and how King Charles should conduct his reign. The man is talking about the pain and suffering of women marrying into this institution. The man is Prince Harry. The institution is his own family. It was a transformative year for the British royals. In the wake of the death of Queen Elizabeth II and the ascension of her 74-year-old son Charles to the throne, the monarchy entered a new and still undetermined era. But it's Harry the Spare and his polarizing American wife Meghan who fascinated us the most. In many ways, the story of the Harry and Meghan in the new 6-part Netflix documentary series seems to be a continuation of the one Diana left off. It's about the oppressiveness of family known as the firm, about the fickleness of fame and the vicious hounding of the press, about private suffering and loss, and about forging a new path in a new nation. Andrew Morton, who has been covering the British royal family for 40 years, joined us on Royal Scandal to discuss the legacy of Queen Elizabeth II, the divisive character of Meghan, and why he thinks Diana would entirely agree with Harry's assessment of the royal family. Hello and welcome to Royal Scandal. Please do well to like, subscribe, comment and turn on the notification bell so as not to miss out on any news updates. There was an intimacy about the scenes between myself and Diana, even though I didn't meet her during the whole process of writing the book. Famously, we use an intermediary, Dr. James Colfast. But just that interaction and the intonation, the mannerisms, even down to the paper used for the manuscript was so authentic that I felt that I was working with a ghost. I found it very moving. The whole drama is really to unfold Diana's character. Obviously, it's a compressed episode, because so many other things, so many dramas happened. But it was compressed in a way that tries to show her character. It was like listening to 6 hours of the tapes compressed into 10, 15 minutes or so. There wasn't the literature or the knowledge around in those days about what bulimia nervosa was. When I was researching it, I got a couple of pamphlets and that was it. There wasn't an awful lot about eating disorders. For me, one of the triumphs of the book is that so many women, some men, who did suffer, went for help. I think that's one of the things that Diana was delighted with. But there were so many secrets that unfolded. Remember, I had been part of believing in the fairy tale, and this is the whole crux of the whole drama surrounding it. There was a fairy tale surrounding Diana that was wholly false. It was a totally false narrative. We know about false narratives elsewhere, but this was a royal false narrative, and it took a long time psychologically for me to start to appreciate the true nature of her life. This was exposed from time to time in real events happening in real time. When, for example, William got his head smacked in with a golf club accidentally and he had a fractured skull, Prince Charles arrived at the hospital along with Diana, and then subsequently Prince Charles went to the opera. Diana had to take comfort using a payphone, because in those days there were no decent mobile phones, to ring James Colfast for help and advice on what she should do, what would happen if William's temperature rose, and so on and so forth. She didn't have her husband there. Her husband was off to the opera. This was well noted at the time, but it confirmed what Diana was saying, that her husband would rather do anything other than spend time alone with her. I want to ask you about the king. We look at William and his charisma and the way that he is being groomed for the kingdom. Here's Charles, a 74-year-old man who is not entirely popular, who doesn't seem to have that kind of charisma. What do you think happens to him now in this new role as the king? Is there space for him to grow into that role? Just look at the history. Edward VII took over from Queen Victoria and made a fist of the job, even though he reigned for a relatively short time, 10 years. He focused on diplomacy. He wasn't focusing on longevity, because he knew he would never outlast Queen Victoria. We have a similar situation with King Charles, that he's going to reign for what? 20, 25 years and then his son will take over. Even if we say it's the same kind of reign as Edward VII, say 10, 15 years, he's got time to make his mark in a different way. I would argue that he would probably focus more on cultural events and maybe even religious accord. He's talked in the past about not being the head of state or the defender of the faith, but defender of faith. Even though he may not be able to say that constitutionally, he may try and do that as it were off the scene, so that he's dealing with Muslims and Jews and various other religions and creeds. That's one area that he could well focus on, because the point has been made several times that Britain is a multicultural, multi-faith society, and the head of that society is a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant family. So how do they make it so that they would reflect more of modern Britain? There is this idea that the monarchy is passé. With the death of Elizabeth, this has come up again. What is the role of the monarchy? What is the role of the Commonwealth? How do we reckon with colonialism? Where do you see the monarchy going from here with King Charles? It's one of the controversial points in The Crown, the first episode where Prince Charles is trying to get the then Prime Minister, John Major, to twist the Queen's arm to get her to abate, conversations that John Major said never happened. Nonetheless, ironically at the time, there was debate about whether the Queen should step down now that she's got to 65. So as you quite rightly say, there's been debate about the future and the relevance of the monarchy throughout the Queen's reign. I remember after my book on Diana came out in 1992, the Times and the Sunday Times organized a conference on the future of the monarchy, and it wasn't easy listening for the sovereign. This is an inflection point. This is a point where we are discussing ideas, concepts, and policy that have been set aside for some years out of respect and deference to the Queen, and notably that is the Commonwealth. Does the Commonwealth continue in its present form? How many nations are going to say, let's just get our own head of state from our own country? Perfectly legitimate ideas. There's the whole idea of Britain as a colonial power and making reparations. These issues will have to be addressed, not just by the royal family, but by the government. You talked earlier about this white, Anglo-Saxon family. The king has a biracial daughter-in-law. He has multiracial grandchildren now. I want to ask you about Harry and Meghan and what happens now in this newly realigned, this newly rearranged family. When I heard the title of Harry's memoir Spare, I had to pick my jaw up off the floor. You and I have talked about the sibling dynamics in this family, what that means to be the heir and the spare. We saw it with Edward and George, we saw it with Margaret and Elizabeth, we see it with William and Harry. What did you think when you heard about the book? Exactly as you said, it will be a Cain and Abel story that is essentially the senior brother gets the money, the title, basically the job, that is to say the king. His life is pretty well defined from now until the moment he goes to meet his maker. For the spare, Margaret, George VI and others, they've got to make their lives separately and there is no guidance. You've got to make your own mistakes. I think that for Harry, that was the difficulty that he found, that he was incredibly popular, but he didn't have the position, nor would he ever have the position to translate that popularity into influence. Before the Queen died, Meghan had been carving this individual lane for herself as a personality, appearing on magazine covers, doing her podcast. Now she is also the daughter-in-law of the king. What does that do, particularly in the UK, for her impression there? She's a divisive character, there's no getting away from that. She's also a divisive character in the US. She's earned the ire of former President Trump and she's taken what would be considered to be political stances. She's seen as essentially a progressive Democrat. That is her label. She has, it seems to me, done good work in terms of her Spotify, actual business. At the same time they've maintained links to the royal family, but not substantive ones. It looks like they're making their life in California. They don't use their HRH title, which is important. They're making a go of it as two individuals not linked to the royal family, just like Harry's mother did. Diana flew the nest and became semi-American in the sense that she spent holidays down here. She was thinking about buying a house here, and would entirely agree with Harry's assessment of the royal family. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe.